The human mind is a wretched, electrified slab of wrinkled meat. A damnable object, condemning all that possess it with the curse of a sapience just potent enough to place humanity in the depths of the valley of the great Dunning-Kruger effect that is the universe. Just smart enough to know how little we matter, but not enough to know how much a million actually is. Yes, one of the many shortcomings of the anxiety and autism dispenser is in properly comprehending big numbers. Evidently, the Neanderthals found little utility in being able to imagine 10 billion berries, an aversion to grind-maxing that no doubt set their extinction in stone. And for their negligence, their children will forever struggle to grapple with the scale of the world they have come to inherit. What the hell do you mean 18 apples? Who's out there buying 18 apples? What do you got against doctors? You think you're better than me? Fuck you. And so it follows that perhaps the most incomprehensible and existentially terrifying concept of the human mind other than oblivion is infinity. Because death isn't just scary because it's the end. Death is scary because it's forever. Where are you going with this excellent question? One I asked repeatedly as I read the deceptively complicated and outstandingly strange subject of this video. The vertical world. A manga that tackles, among other things, theoretical physics, time travel, black holes, simulation hypothesis, literal infinite distances, race wars, various technologies so obscenely advanced as to feel closer to fantasy than most isekai do, simulation hypothesis again, the existence of the soul, cycles of violence, the resilience and ingenuity of humanity in the face of an uncaring universe, and simulation hypothesis again, a web of subject matter whose weight and gravity make it even stranger to discover that this is a shonen manga, and that the early portions of it look like this. And not in that Attack on Titan, Chainsaw Man sense of shonen by technicality of the magazine. I mean dyed-in-the-wool, power of friendship, never give up, anime hair, shonen ass shonen. And you might hear that and feel as though that kind of contrast would make for some awkward tonal clashing. Yes. But any amount of corniness that may needle at your suspension of disbelief has a habit of being completely overwhelmed by the snowballing insanity of this bizarre, dimension-hopping, world-warping odyssey. So much so that in addition to the spoiler warnings I'll inevitably have later in the video, I'll also put one down right now. Because watching this universe expand before your eyes really is the best part of the vertical world. So without further ado, let's... Is that a... Whoa! Ruska's life in the infinitely extending spire known as the vertical world was an uneventful one, whiling away the days in a blur of tedium so indistinct that it's not entirely clear what he was even doing before the start of the story. But that's okay, because author Ku Tanaka just happens to have nothing less than the fastest inciting incident in the West. And while we may never learn what exactly it was Ruska was doing before he watched his call to adventure plummet into the abyss before him, we do know that it was miserable enough that he was willing to jump in after it at a moment's notice. A jump that leaves him hurtling downwards at terminal velocity for, no joke, 10 days. Because more so than adventure, or science fiction, or friendship, or any of that other stuff I brought up in the intro, this is a series about falling. So much falling, I would go so far as to call it the main means of traversal in the setting, to which end the webtoon format works pretty well for it. Makes it so that the stretches of under-detailed or outright blank space are actually justified, though the format is likely the second thing you'll notice about the visuals. The first being, hey, when did Jump start recruiting mangaka from early 2010s DeviantArt? Though when you've read enough manga, you get to a point where any series where the art doesn't look like this warrants sticking around for a couple of chapters for the novelty alone. And sure enough, that's exactly what the initial stretch of the vertical world feels like. A novelty. A series that had very big and equally vague ideas that the author lacked the technical ability in both writing and artwork to bring together into any cohesive whole. Ruska just seems to go from set piece to set piece, overcoming roadblocks via a series of incredibly convenient events, including the gradual formation of a party that comprises, among others, a super genius robot scientist and a super genius scientist who is a robot. It feels almost episodic at points, like it's trying a bunch of different things, groping around for some kind of foothold without any real direction beyond exploring the setting. But hey, it's a really cool setting with a straightforward objective. Fallen whole, meet robot, befriend robot. Meet girl, befriend girl, lose girl to mysterious forces that take apart the world like PVC piping, journey to rescue girl, etc. Not the most mind-blowing or technically impressive, but having enough going on to follow along, at least for a bit. So you do, expectations likely not particularly high, mostly just wanting to see more of what this guy came up with. And then something happens. Ruska and crew arrive at what appears to be the bottom of the vertical world following Omega, the girl abducted by unknown powers. Only for Ruska's robot friend, Professor Kelvin, yes, this is what all the names are like, get used to it, to inform them that this is not where she was taken. See, Kelvin attached a tracker to her before she was yoinked, and so can tell she's somewhere far below them. How far? Well...
Ridiculous.
What are you doing? A measurement?
I've already completed it. I am one with the machine. It is outside of measurement range. I can calculate the distance using the transmitter's embedded timestamp information. However, the time counter exceeds the limit of its 64-bit memory allocation.
Huh?
A distance that cannot be measured in 64 bits would exceed 580 billion light years, give or take.
And here we are introduced to Ku Tanaka's favorite trick. Rudimentary artwork accompanied by indescribably massive concepts. His ability to pull this off repeatedly being especially impressive considering what if flat earthers are only about 90 degrees off is already a pretty ambitious concept to start with. Well, trick is probably the wrong word, because that implies the art looks like this on purpose to catch you off guard, when in fact this is honestly just the best the guy could do. That sounds like an insult. It's not, for reasons I'll touch on later, but for now I digress. This is one of the first hints we get as to the scope the story is going for, one where distance and time range from malleable to meaningless, and where both the people and the world itself struggle to sustain themselves in any capacity in the wake of that fact. Take Omega, for example, who we learn is actually one of thousands of identical girls known as Fallen Maidens, cast down into the vertical world in an attempt to somehow prevent its inevitable decay and collapse via a special substance contained within their body. A practice that has left untold thousands dead in service of the only known chance this world has for survival. Or is it? Or is this ritual, in fact, an act of superstition, wherein maidens are driven mad by the impossibility of their task to ostensibly 1v1 entropy itself? And that's if they were lucky enough not to be caught by the malevolent living city that drains them for energy to delay its own impending demise, its creator, for some reason, deciding to curse it with the fear of death. Said creator, known as the Architect, is also the creator of the vertical world, and so is likely also responsible, or at least aware of the reason for, its current precarious state. Or is he? Or is the vertical world, in fact, merely the remains of an ancient civilization brought to ruin as the result of a violent race war between two nations? As the gang finds out by hopping into a complete virtual recreation of the past contained within the circuits of a little beetle robot? Maybe! It would certainly explain why the air in the vertical world is toxic without a gas mask, what with all the chemical warfare and such. And it's only with the context of this past that Ruska and crew are able to begin putting together not only the events that led to the current state of their home, but their own vague and uncertain origins, even managing to find a potential path to bridge the seemingly impossible distance keeping them from Omega. Or do they? Or is the vertical world, inhabitants included, merely an infinitely extending yet completely artificial construct, created spontaneously by a humanity so technologically advanced as to be nonsensical, feeding it directly into a black hole in an effort to prevent their spaceship containing the last remnants of the human race from being subsumed into a spaghettified oblivion? I know all that sounded like major ending spoilers. This happens a little over halfway through the manga. Are you beginning to see the vision? Actually, don't answer that. Let me elaborate a bit more. The vertical world was spontaneously constructed out of dark energy by a spaceship's super-intelligent AI when it unexpectedly encountered a black hole, generating an entire world with various cultures and presumably millennia if not eons of history and an entire new human race to populate it, merely to feed it endlessly into the gaping abyss of the closest thing to the gates of hell modern science has been able to corroborate the existence of. One of the surviving humans, Ruska, then enters the man-made horror beyond his comprehension to see if it could be settled, only to be seamlessly incorporated into it, memories and all. Ruska's friend Chandra then, in an effort to rescue him, alters the very weave of this world to lead him down a path that might let him escape. A path that no matter how circuitous, nonsensical, or bizarrely convenient, he would be sure to follow. A path so bloated and poorly considered it involved the creation of a second world within this artificial world, one plagued by violent conflict so its denizens might eventually construct a weapon powerful enough to blast open the Truman Show-ass walls of this whack-ass crystal prison and set him free. Two entire realities of people, manifested, self-actualized, and damned over the course of about one real-life week because of a navigation error. And all of that, all the confusion, the scale, the existential torment is rendered like this. Except, as you might have noticed, not exactly. because turns out drawing for hours on end every single day tends to increment your artistic abilities, especially when you consistently punch way above your weight class in terms of scale and complexity. It is honestly an experience watching the artwork go from amateur at best to actually evoking the kinds of emotions the story calls for and then some. Not necessarily in the character art, which becomes serviceable but never amazing, but in the areas that count, the world and environment design. Because this is an artist that had his fucking priorities straight, and understood that the most interesting character he had made was the giant hollow needle. And watching that needle go from a vague approximation of metal to a full, monolithic, tactile structure lined with death machines is something else. Like the art itself is stretching and evolving to try and keep up with the ambition of the story. Though granted, even at its best, the art never becomes mind-blowing. The author is not Tsutomu Nihei, his depictions of the abstract don't carry the kind of intensity you might hope for. But when it comes to the subject matter being tackled, does that really matter? Because the infinite, by definition, cannot be depicted by human hands. We shut down trying to conceptualize it, much less recreate it. So how much closer to correct is, say, blame than the vertical world, really? Even beyond manga, artists across mediums, borders, and decades have tried their hand at it from numerous angles. The unending, horrifying imaginary prisons of Piranesi, glimpsed somewhere between a malaria-induced haze and divine revelation. Romano Polka's 46 years counting up towards eternity, one number at a time, destined for incompleteness the moment he laid the number 1 on the very first canvas. And a third example I ripped from that one Jacob Geller video. All inadequate by the very nature of their physical existence. In that sense, you could have a crack team of the greatest mangaka in history working in perfect unison to achieve a rendering of the subject beyond Kutanaka's wildest ambitions. But a mile isn't meaningfully longer than a foot when compared to the diameter of the known universe. So ultimately, all that really remains to judge it by is the vibes and how well they suit the project. And for the story being told, I'd say the vibes are pretty damn good, because a rudimentary art style that grows and evolves at an astounding yet still inadequate rate to try and capture ideas far beyond its caliber feels thematically correct, if nothing else. Granted, said vibes are very different than those of its predecessors and contemporaries. A lot lighter, to the point some may call it naive or corny. Which, like I said, shonen ass shonen. Meaning no matter how obscenely massive or incomprehensible the obstacle, Ruska and friends will overcome it with the power of friendship and probably a couple of plot conveniences. And while that has actual narrative justification while they're within the vertical world, they still get away with a lot of shit they really shouldn't after they bust out, and in increasingly ridiculous ways. Especially so considering Ruska really doesn't have any powers or training to speak of. Man is raw dogging this whole existential nightmare with a can-do attitude and a half-metal hand. Oh right, Ruska also loses several appendages over the course of the adventure, including both his legs. His reaction to which, much like all the other life-shattering, paradigm-annihilating revelations he's backhanded with, is kinda muted. Because there's only so much time for introspection when the author has some more crazy bullshit to show the audience. Plus, if the characters reacted in a remotely realistic manner to the things they are subjected to, they would probably go insane. If not look for a place to fall that actually lets them hit the ground. Either way, not the tone the series is going for. Which, that in itself might turn you off of this manga. Because if what you enjoy about hard existential sci-fi is humanity's near Lovecraftian insignificance in the face of it, this is not the series for you. Though you probably surmised that when I explained that the first half of it is essentially a warped semi-subversion of a Chosen One narrative. And honestly, that's kind of refreshing. It turns this into a story that looks at how infinitesimally small we are in the universe and acknowledges just how incredible it is that we were able to figure that out in the first place. The impossible volume and complexity of the setting and technology therein is not some signifier of our impotence, but a testament of our ability to do anything. And this sort of attitude does risk leading to an unhelpful sort of tech fetishizy outlook where global warming's not a problem because we'll just invent our way out of it or colonize Mars or some shit. But because it's a shonen at its core, that's not the conclusion it comes to. On the contrary, it's humanity's wanton misuse of technology that causes so much of the suffering we witness throughout the manga. It is, in fact, coming together with other people that saves the day. It believes not in the idea of some technological utopia brought about by the smartest and specialist sex pest in the whole wide world, but camaraderie, resourcefulness, determination. Technology will not save us, people will. Real indomitable human spirit type shit, which I am absolutely here for. And sure, there's a million things I could pick apart about the narrative. Zupa existing almost entirely to produce whatever robot or modification is necessary to progress the plot, them sometimes bringing up logical inconsistencies in the science when realistically all of this is complete nonsense, etc. But the whole thing is so unique and awe-inspiring, I feel like I'd be missing the forest for the trees. Or the Milky Way for the constellation, I guess. So where does that leave you? Well, ideally having paused to read the whole thing before coming back to finish the video, but for everyone else, there is so fucking much I skimmed over or just skipped altogether. I assure you there is still a ton left to discover on your own. And while I can't guarantee you'll love it necessarily, you'll be hard-pressed to find anything quite like it. Give it a chance, it'll surprise you. And thank you for watching. Next video should ideally be out before humanity creates an infinite, colossal, needle-based civilization out of dark matter, but as always, no promises. See you then.